Hello everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. What happens when a Dungeons & Dragons player takes some inspiration from Metal Gear Solid for his character, only for the Dungeon Master to backtrack on the character's approval? Well, kind of the same thing Konami has done with the series. To the post. My Dungeon Master gave me a gun, then nerfed me into diapers. By Reddit user Toby49. So, a now former friend of mine invited me to join his homebrew D&D campaign. He knew I was a huge Metal Gear Solid fan, and thought it would be fun for me to play a character inspired by Solid Snake, a fantasy mercenary version, of course. I was totally down. I told him that I didn't care about stats or min-maxing. I just wanted to make dumb snake quips and snipe people from a distance. He was a little hesitant about guns in a fantasy setting, but I told him to give me whatever he wanted. I just wanted a ranged fighter, and was cool with any homebrew rules he made. So he rolled my stats, gave me a unique rifle called the Viper's Bite, and said that if I found any vanilla feats that broke his custom rules, to run them by him. That sounded fair. I immediately found a feat that negated the reload property of my rifle, and I showed it to him. "Oh dude, run that. That's hilarious," he said. So I did. We start the campaign, and things are going great. I'm leading the party on a mission to take down a corrupt kingdom. We fight a sketchy royal priest, then gear up to storm the king's castle. My rifle, now reloading free, was pulling some serious weight in these fights, letting me make multiple attacks per round. The rest of the group loved the snake roleplay. I was having a blast, and everything was smooth. Until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, the DM starts talking to me about this Wild Tempest cleric build he found online, something that could deal like 120 damage per hit. He laughs and says, "I could use this to TPK the whole party." I nervously chuckle and say that sounds pretty meta, but didn't think anything more of it. Then we meet the king, and surprise, he's a Tempest cleric. The king completely ignores the rest of the party and focuses solely on me. I had around 100 HP. He hits me 3 times with his busted 120 damage attacks and practically dusts me on the spot. If it weren't for our bard reviving me, that would have been it. After the session, I ask him privately if everything's cool, and he straight up tells me, "I just don't like how much damage her rifle does." Okay, fine. I tell him I'm happy to adjust whatever needs changing, just to let me know. His fix? He nerfs my gun's damage from 2d12 to 2d6. Man, depending on the level they were playing at, that is one heck of a nerf. Not ideal, but whatever. I keep playing. Fast forward a few sessions, and he comments during the game that my rolls are suspiciously high. I'm using D&D Beyond. He can see every roll, but he still says, "I think I gave you stats that are too good." Once again, I offer to reroll or change anything, and he declines. Instead, he introduces wraith-like enemies that rapidly age you. Of course, they latch onto me. So I go full Old Snake from Metal Gear Solid 4. The DM then announces that I now have permanent disadvantage on everything, and the only cure is on the other side of the planet. Well, that is one way to nerf a character. Not the right way, but a way nonetheless. So now the party is stuck with a senile, wheezing sniper. Then comes the shipping yard session. We're looking for a boat, and my character is kidnapped by a cult. I'm tied to a chair, and I try to use my espionage skills to escape. The DM tells me to make a DC 20 check, and if I fail, "You shit yourself." Well, that sounds unnecessarily targeted. And with a DC of 20? I'm not kidding. I proceed to fail 5 times. Snake is now a senile, incontinent old man. Eventually, a cultist finds me, steps on my head until I die, and that's how it ends. Yeah, this DM definitely had it out for OP at this point. I mean, no saves or anything? Just smush? The rest of the party was just as confused as I was. No one could understand why the DM was singling me out session after session. After I dropped out of the game, he accused me of turning the group against him over a stupid game. I told him that I didn't have to say anything. The group watched it happen. They were pissed for me. We're now running a new campaign without him, and it's been great. Man, talk about a kick in the butt. It was pretty obvious that this DM just didn't like OP's character, even though he was the one who suggested it. And instead of admitting it and working with OP on changing things or re-rolling some stuff, he just decided to put OP's character into situations that were unavoidable, all to just kill off his character in a humiliating way. No wonder the other people in the group were pissed off for OP. I mean, I would have been too. But at least it sounds like OP and the rest of the group started up their own game, and hopefully, OP can bring back his Snake character, like Konami should, not just a remake. But with my disapproving nod toward Konami's mishandling of the Metal Gear Solid series, let's move on to the next post, where a player gets angry over a druid deciding to get rid of some gnolls over healing him for the third time during a battle. To the post. Paladin goes off on druid for casting Firewall to kill gnolls. By Reddit user La Fleur Sauvage Gaming. Online D&D game. I'm playing a wildfire druid. Lots of fire, lots of healing, ashes to allies. She is from a small city nestled deep in the woods and grew up in the monastery of the local forest goddess. Standard fantasy fare. She acts like a priest of a nature goddess and steward of the natural cycle of the forest. Paladin, throughout the game. Why isn't she wearing armor and wild shaping? You're playing a druid, not a wizard. You shouldn't be casting all those spells. Your character shouldn't care about what's in books. They're made from trees. You should hate libraries. Why does your character have a home in the city? She should live in the wild. Then today, we were surrounded by gnolls, our backs against a ravine wall, and I waited until the last second and upcast Firewall in an arc completely around us and straight through the middle of the gnolls. It was a glorious moment of a druid pulling some serious druid shit, further enhanced by her wildfire perks. The gnolls were effed. The ones that didn't burn to death the second it was cast ran off and were then murdered by scorching rays and arrows from a ranger before they got out of range. The annoying player had gone down 3 times in that fight because he didn't pay attention to the cleric when he was told not to break Sanctuary until the cleric could drop a real heal on him. The second time he got picked up as collateral from a mass healing word, and the third time we were not going to bother because he was just going to stupid himself to death again. He was angry at me because Firewall is a defensive spell. It has wall in its name. You should have used that spell slot to cast heal on me, so I could have fought them. I am the paladin. He then went on to lecture me. Druids are about area control, not about killing. Blah blah blah. I finally just snapped, saying, "Shut the F up, you tool. If they are so cooked that savages who like well-done steaks are showing up because they like the smell of charcoal, the area is controlled, you damn tool." He blocked me on Discord after that, and is apparently asking the DM to kick me from the game right now for using the F word and calling him a tool. As I wrote this, and just before I was going to click post, the DM announced that the paladin has quit the game. Well, that escalated quickly. Something tells me that this player may have been a problem for a while before this session of D&D. And it sounded like he had a bit of main character syndrome, since he was so angry that OP used her spell slot for Firewall instead of just healing him. And while Firewall can be used as a defensive spell, it can also be really good at crowd control, and it sounded like OP used it to great effect as both. Now, should OP have blown up on this player like she did? Probably not, but it did sound like this was a straw that broke the camel's back type of situation. Though, at least it sounds like OP and the rest of the group don't have to deal with this player anymore. Now, before we move on to this next post, here's Nipsey with a banana on his head to remind you to like the video and subscribe if you're new. He's such a goofball. Also, if you would like to help the channel out directly, I'll leave the Ko-fi and Ko-fi links in the description. But with that, let's move on to a story where our player's impatience gets the better of him. To the post. Had a player issue an ultimatum to me, the DM, during a session. By Reddit user, The Fox and the Raven. I feel like this is fairly mild as RPG horror stories go, but it still threw me for a loop. This past Friday, I ran a session with my players, exploring an abandoned, cursed city. We had left off the previous week, with the party having made their way inside and gotten lost, as the buildings seemed to shift around them. They had just made it to an inn with a glowing golden light inside and a face looking out at them from a window. The inn was a protected safe zone, made so by an act of divine intervention on behalf of a paladin inside. The character looking out the window was a new player who was just joining the group. This week, we picked back up with some discussion between characters about plans for navigating the city, the introduction to the new character, etc. They each had a little downtime for preparations before turning in for the night. And then I had the party's employer, a witch, visit the new character in a dream. We got to learn the new character's motivations, as a deal was struck in exchange for their services in helping the party on their quest to retrieve a MacGuffin. Throughout this, the problem player kept cutting others off and trying to rush things along. Yeah, we all go to sleep and then wake up rested. Now we're exploring the city. And, great, we carry out the plan we made and we got to where we were headed. What's next? In the midst of other characters still talking to NPCs, gathering information, or role-playing amongst themselves as they talk to the new character. I had an eye on the clock, and things were moving along at a good pace. We just had some story things to play out. That wasn't sitting well with this player, who just continued to be rude and pushy. It got to the point where two other players were DMing me, asking what was up with this guy. The paladin makes a show of taking down the barrier, protecting the inn, and the party set out, quickly getting lost by the shifting buildings. They had surmised that light was part of the solution, as the city was blanketed by heavy clouds, and the days were being perceived as being unnaturally shortened. But they initially held off on using either the druid's daylight spell or a magical orb that I had given them previously, for fear that their resources would need to be conserved. Finally, they chose to cast the daylight spell on the problem player's arrow, while the rogue climbed a nearby building. The fired arrow revealed a path forward, and gave the rogue a brief glimpse of the true layout of the city's streets. That's when things came to a head. Problem player cutting off the rogue mid-sentence as he was telling the party what he saw. Great, sunlight was the answer. We get to the castle at the center of the city. What do we find? DM. Hold on. Rogue, you were saying? Problem player. If the next words out of your mouth aren't "you arrive at the castle," then I'm gone. DM. Are you kidding me? Rogue, you climb back down the rope to the street below, and Discord chimes as problem player disconnects. The shadows then flow out from between the nearby buildings, like a black, inky liquid. The many streams of shadow pull together in the street ahead, and then the liquid begins to drip upwards, forming itself into the shape of a figure. So, 30 seconds after the impatient a-hole disconnects, We were rolling for initiative for the combat that he apparently couldn't wait to get to. He started texting me immediately afterwards. I sent him a message saying that I would reach out in a few days to talk, but I didn't want to waste any more time on him. I was, and still am, annoyed. I apologized to the other players, and we carried on. The new player, in her first ever D&D combat, did a great job in the opening rounds, and we'll pick it up mid-encounter this next Friday. I wonder why that player was being so impatient. I mean, as it sounded, the pace of the roleplay was going at a nice pace, and the whole shifting city concept was really cool. Not to mention, they needed some time to onboard the new player, so they had to roleplay that. Perhaps this player just had a bad day or something, and was taking it out in game. Or they didn't like the fact that a new player was joining the group. Either way, leaving in the middle of a session like a toddler who didn't get his way is not a good look. And hopefully, OP can talk to him and see what the heck that was all about. And maybe after a few days, the player will cool off and realize how much of a douche canoe he was being, and apologizes. Then, the game can continue like normal. But if not, it might be a sign that this player needs to disband from the group. Let's move on to the following story, where a potential player has a grudge over another player's backstory for a Mutants and Masterminds game. To the post. My short story caused the player to leave the game. By Reddit user, Chronically Crude. Back during the pandemic, one of my friends came up with a really cool way to run a Mutants and Masterminds game. He picked that system because it's super flexible, no classes, easy character building, and you can make just about anything. Plus, we were stuck using Roll20, so he wanted something smooth to run and play. All we really needed was a character sheet and a token. His pitch was simple but unique. Low-powered supers, each from a different universe. He wanted a mashup of genres, but instead of just doing regular character creation, he asked everyone to write a short story about their character. The only rules were to pick a genre, keep our characters low-powered, end the story a certain way, and keep it under 8 pages. After that, he would read them and help build your character in the system based on what you wrote. He wanted this to be done because so no one would accidentally show up as a demigod while everyone else was a guy with a baseball bat. Honestly, we were very much intrigued by the idea. Having a character with a backstory was one thing, but never did I have the opportunity or ever thought of the players writing a short story about their character leading up to the first session. Furthermore, he created a Session 0 for each of us individually, which was heavily dependent upon our short stories. Even though I've played Mutants and Masterminds a ton, I stuck to the story thing just to see where it went. I ended up writing 3 short stories, 1 sword and sorcery, 1 space opera, and 1 post-apocalyptic. I figured he would go for the sword and sorcery one, since most of the group was leaning sci-fi, but he was really into the post-apocalyptic one. He said that he really liked the idea of a Mad Max type character, and wanted to figure out how to make that kind of character work in a multiverse game. I liked that the guy was more of a survivor than a hero, and that his skills were gritty and grounded. Plus, he liked the idea that a part of the character is the car, not just something that the character has as equipment. My character was this grimy, no-nonsense guy, driving a beat-up police cruiser with some jerry-rigged weapons. Kinda detective meets wasteland warrior. My character was heavily influenced by Mad Max, Twisted Metal, and Dick Tracy. Anyway, after we all finished our stories and did Session 0 stuff, the Game Master told us we could post our stories in the group if we wanted to, so I posted mine. This is where I introduce you to a man I refer to as Paige. I knew Paige from college. We were in the same fiction classes. Even back then, he was one of those guys, always trying to gatekeep what counts as good sci-fi or fantasy. acting like a walking encyclopedia, but never fun to talk to. We clashed a lot, though years later, I ran into him again at a local game store, and I thought maybe he'd mellowed out. I was wrong. Paige was the only person who hated my story. He flipped out about how post-apocalyptic road warrior types aren't viable characters, and how I was ruining everyone's immersion. Mind you, my guy was probably the least powerful build in the group, and I wasn't trying to hog the spotlight or anything. But Paige zeroed in on the fact that my car had a mounted gun and some defensive, very basic ones, nothing wild, and said that meant that I wasn't taking the game seriously. He even said that the fact that I was inspired by Twisted Metal meant that my character was basically a joke because it's not a skill-based game. Twisted Metal, not skill-based? I don't know about you, but that was one of the big games when I was a kid, and you definitely needed some skill, especially in versus mode. The Game Master backed me up. He reminded Paige that none of us had even played together yet, just the story intros, and that all our characters ended up in the same shared world via the story endings. But Paige wasn't having it. He said I was going to break immersion for everyone, and claimed his years of RPG experience meant that he knew better than the Game Master. I even offered to nerf my character or change stuff to make it easier for the group, but it didn't matter. He wanted me out, or for me to change my character, or he was leaving. So he left. That was in the summer of 2020, and we just recently finished that campaign about a week ago. Well, it sounds to me like Paige probably didn't have much of a problem with OP's story or character at all, but may have had some sort of beef with OP since they went to the same school, had the same classes together, and OP even saying that they clashed a lot back then, because I don't see anything wrong with OP's character or the backstory they made. Then there was the fact that Paige told the DM that OP either has to change their character or leave, or else he was going to leave, which ultimately happened. So it sounds like the trash took itself out here, and that OP and the group had a fun game that stretched for almost 5 years. So at least some of these stories have happy endings. And speaking of happy endings, let's end today's video with a story that is a bit more on the lighthearted side. To the post. Dungeon Master puts a riddle only his girlfriend can solve, by Reddit user FV Dungeon Creator. This is not exactly a horror story, but some might call it bad DMing nevertheless. This was ages ago, still playing 3.5. The party was venturing forth well into a dungeon that was crucial for the main quest. During the session, after doing a lot of slash against many foes and overcoming difficult traps, we arrived to a door, but it didn't budge. The party succeeded in making an Arcana check. The door was spellbound, and we needed to solve a riddle to open it. We couldn't find the riddle, as we discovered soon after that the door was activated only when the druid, the DM's girlfriend, was nearby. We thought it was kind of logical, since she was the only spellcaster of the group, and as she approached to hear the riddle from the door, the riddle was, "What did I drink on our first date?" We all raised our eyebrows. She facepalmed and chuckled and said, "Of course, whiskey." Then the door opened. She then told us about the fact that whiskey was the drink that DM ordered on their first date, and that it was what he orders when he is with someone he really likes, and that it was his way to tell her that he was into her on their first date. As the door opened, we realized that this wasn't an Easter egg, and no, we weren't playing a Valentine's one-shot for the DM's girlfriend. Behind that door was a room, and in it, an artifact that was of vital importance to defeat the BBEG for later, i.e., what we were looking for in that dungeon. We all kind of chuckled and moved on, even if the whole thing was very immersion breaking, to say the least. Well, that is a kind of sweet thing for a DM to do for his girlfriend. But it probably would have been a bit better to do, as like a side thing, instead of something that was integral to the actual plot. I mean, if you have a sort of puzzle that needs solved to move the main plot along, it should be something that involves all the players, not just one. But overall, it's not that bad of a horror story. Just a bit of bad DMing in my opinion. Though, what do you all think? But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.